Hey everyone! So today we are talking about series finales, and I have finished quite a few fantasy book series over the past year and a half, so I thought I would do a video dedicated to talking about the last book in each of those series that I finished and ranking them and seeing, did these endings stick the landing? Did they make the whole journey of reading this huge series worth it? And we'll talk about my favorites and my least favorites of all of these. So without further ado, I'm going to get right into it. And I'm going to start with my least favorite of all of these finales. And I think my least favorite is going to have to go to, unfortunately, Locklands by Robert Jackson Bennett. I think, ended up giving this 4 stars, but it was the most disappointing for me because Foundryside and Shorefall were 5 stars, easy favorites of all time. I thought that this trilogy was easily going to be a favorite of all time, and I would still say the trilogy as a whole is great and I would highly recommend it, and I would still say it's one of my favorites, but it's not in like my top 5 where I thought it would be once I had finished it. And the reason being, Locklands has a huge time jump from the ending of the second book of Shorefall. So with that time jump, we're in a very different place with our characters, we are in a very different place with our world. It's almost unrecognizable at first, and it really takes you a second to reorient yourself to this world because everything's changed so much from where you left things off. And I thought that the time jump, I didn't love it. I was very excited to see the immediate aftermath of what happened after Shorefall because that was such a good ending. And to have that time jump, I was a little disappointed. I did eventually kind of start to enjoy it again, and I still love the characters in this series, but what didn't work as well for me in this one was the battle scenes, and the magic itself became so much more abstract. The magic system in the first 2 books, you can tell it's getting a little bit more complex with each book, but it still was easy enough to follow. It was really unique, very different than anything I'd read, and I really liked seeing the rules of the magic and seeing how the magic was incorporated into these battle scenes. But by the end, by this 3rd book, the magic became so abstract, such a large scope of what it was trying to tackle, that it almost kind of lost me. Like I had a really hard time following what was going on. And so I found myself losing interest during a lot of these fight scenes and battle scenes. And this book was filled with a ton of them. There was not a whole lot of other stuff going on besides like fight scene after fight scene or battle after battle. So unfortunately, this one was just definitely my least favorite of the series and was the most disappointing for me. The next one I have is The Burning White by Brent Weeks. This is one that I had heard really mixed things about. So I didn't have the highest of expectations going into The Burning White, and I'm very happy about that. Now, I really like the Lightbringer series. I really like how fast-paced it was. I love the magic. I thought the characters were great. So The Burning White has all the characters that I love. It has the magic that I love. The problem with it is that the plot conveniences towards the end of this series, I think that that is where it could lose you. If you do not like how these characters end up getting out of certain situations, then this could really not work for you. The plot conveniences were a lot, and I don't think they bothered me as much as they bother a lot of other people. I still gave this book 4 stars, but I do have to admit that stuff came up in this last book that really hadn't been established in previous books, which is always a bummer. Because I think that Brent Weeks knew, like, he had to introduce something totally different or new in order to put the characters where he needed them. And it just felt a little forced, and it didn't get quite developed as much as I was hoping it would. So this one, I can see why it has so many mixed reviews, and I myself, even though I wasn't as bothered by it as other readers probably are, it still did take away a little bit from the rest of the series. So it's not my favorite ending. It's not the worst ending I've read, though. It was still a good series. I'm still very happy I finished it out and read it all. But yeah, I can definitely see why this one has the mixed reviews. The next one I have is The Night Masquerade by Nnedi Okorafor. So this is one that is a novella series. So it's a little bit harder to judge this with all of these other like epic fantasy series that are humongous series and humongous books, because this series of novellas is more of a sci-fi series, and it's one that packed such a punch in such a short amount of pages. I think that this series excelled in its world building and its character development, and the fact that it did it all with just 3 novellas is incredibly impressive. I will say for me, the third book in this novella series was my least favorite because I think of all 3 of the books, this one tried to tackle the most and didn't have enough time or enough pages to really dive into everything it was tackling. I really overall like this novella series. I do highly recommend it. It's just this last one was unfortunately my least favorite because it was just a little too much, and I wish that this one, more so than any of the others, I wish this one had been turned into a full novel, because then I feel like it could have been incredible if we'd had a little bit more time to dive even deeper into all of these different things that the author was introducing. The next one I have is City of Miracles by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is another series that I read by this author, and I ended up actually liking the finale of this one more than I liked Locklands, even though I overall still like the Founders trilogy more than this one. The big call out for this trilogy of books is that each book follows a different main point of view. You get the same cast of characters in all 3 books, but each book is told from kind of one main perspective that you're following. The first book was definitely my favorite of the trilogy, but the second and third were so much fun, and this third one especially gets into a lot more of the lore of the world and a lot more of the gods walk among us trope, explores a lot more of the gods, that I really, really enjoyed it. I really liked the focus of this one and how it just raised the stakes so much. And the main character that you're following, I think, is like a fan favorite character in the series. He wasn't personally my favorite, but I really liked him, and I can see why he would be a fan favorite among the readers of this trilogy. So this one was great. I thought it was a solid conclusion to the trilogy as a whole. It still featured the characters that you grew to love from the first 2 books and did them justice, and just left the characters in a really good place that made sense for the trilogy. So this is one I would definitely recommend, and one that I would say stuck the landing. So moving on, the next one I have is Fury Song by Rosaria Munda. Another one that ended this trilogy in a way that totally made sense, totally worked for all the main characters, was emotional, yet it left you feeling very satisfied. The reason it's not closer to the top is because, again, this one was my least favorite of the series. I thought the first 2 books in this trilogy did much more of the explorations of the post-revolutionary society that we're in. It went a lot more into like the politics of it, the economics of it, and I loved that focus, like seeing the politicking that these characters had to do with this new government that was coming in. It was so interesting, and I think the second book's my favorite because of all of that. The third book also introduces new character perspectives, which weren't my favorite, and the second book had that a little bit, but the third book really had it, and I liked our other main characters more than I liked these new perspectives. The other thing with this one is that it could really work for you if you prefer focusing on like a character's individual emotional journey, because this is the one that really tackles our two main characters and how they are going on their own personal journeys of finding what's going to make them happy and what they can do to finally have a good life. So I think that this did such a great job with the series. Just the things that it was focusing on weren't my favorite things of this series, but that doesn't mean it was bad. It just means that I really loved the other books. This one was still really, really good. Okay, this is getting really hard because I'm trying to rank this based off of how well I think this last book in the series ranks among the previous books in the series and how well it wraps everything up. So it's not necessarily ranking things based off of my personal enjoyment, it's just ranking them based off of how well I think they concluded the series. So the next one I have is going to be Age of Empire by Michael J. Sullivan. You see why I had to give a disclaimer before showing this book, because Age of Empire is a part of Legends of the First Empire. It's the last book in that series, and this is my favorite fantasy series of all time. I love this fantasy series. Age of Empire was easy 5 stars. I loved it so much. However, I think why this isn't at the top is because it's not my favorite book in the series. Actually, it might be towards like the middle of my favorites of this series. And I've seen mixed reviews from people who wanted more closure for some of our characters than what we got. Now, I personally loved where we left all of our characters, how we wrapped everything up. The closure we did get from this book worked for me, but I can totally see why it may not be enough for other readers. So while I loved this conclusion and I think it was fantastic, and it definitely, in my opinion, sticks the landing because it wraps everything up so nicely. It answers all of the questions that the series brought up, but it leaves you wanting more from the world, and the characters are just so incredible, and it does all of them justice, in my opinion. However, it's not my favorite book in the series, and I've seen mixed reviews. So that is why Age of Empire is where it is at. Again, not based off my personal enjoyment. I love this book. The next one I have is Wrath by John Gwynne. Another one that I love, 5 stars, easy, but was not my favorite in the series. And that will go to Ruin. The reason being, Wrath ends this Faithful and the Fallen series in such a fantastic way. It's epic, it's action-packed, it's exciting, it's edge of your seat, it's emotional, it has amazing scenes that you're just cheering for these characters, you just love it, right? And so I love how John Gwynne ended this series. But Ruin, in my opinion, the 3rd book in this series, had like the best scenes in the entire series. Wrath had great scenes, but Ruin, for me, has the ones that when I think of this series, I think of those scenes from Ruin that were so epic and amazing and powerful. Truly cheering, like jumping up and down, was so excited about some of the stuff that was happening in Ruin. So Wrath is fantastic, but it's not my favorite in the series. It does stick the landing though. Right, now we are getting to the last 2 books. The last 2 books I have, the first of those last 2 is going to be Percepliquis by Michael J. Sullivan. Now, this is why this list is so hard for me to do, because I like Legends of the First Empire more than I like the Ririya Revelations. I like Age of Empire more than I like Percepliquis. However, Percepliquis is my favorite book in the Ririya Revelations. I think that this series only gets better and better, with a couple of exceptions, but like Percepliquis is, for me, by far my favorite in this series. So it totally exceeded my expectations. It was extremely emotional, it had real consequences, but it had these epic moments. It was exciting. It had these big reveals. And even though I knew what some of the reveals were going to be because I read Legends of the First Empire first, if you hadn't read Legends and you had read Ririya Revelations first, those reveals would have been like all-time epic. So I have to give credit where credit's due, because Percepliquis really did an amazing job of wrapping up the Ririya Revelations and was my favorite by far in the series. So great job, Percepliquis. You get the number 2 spot. And then my number 1 spot is going to go to The Cuckoo by Leo Carew. This one I talked about in my January wrap-up, and I talked about how epic and emotional and twisty this book was. It just went in so many different directions, but every direction worked. And the way it ended was just so perfect. I can't imagine this series ending in any other way. And the reason it takes the number 1 spot is because of how much it exceeded my expectations and how much it improved upon the previous books. The Wolf was 4 stars for me. I thought it was good, not great. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it enough to continue. The Spider was 4.5 stars. I loved it. I thought it improved upon everything from The Wolf. I was super excited with the direction this was going. The Cuckoo, 5 stars, totally exceeded my expectations, is by far the best book in the series, and just was like perfection. Like, there was not one thing I would have changed about this last book and how it all wrapped up. So The Cuckoo has to take the first spot because it's my favorite book in the series. I thought there was not one thing it could have done differently to have ended this trilogy in a more satisfying way. And it was really emotional, like very powerful how it ended, because it's a little bit unexpected and a little bit different than what you typically get from your fantasy series, and I really got to respect it for that. So I love The Cuckoo. It was really fantastic. So that is my ranking for all of these series conclusions that I've read in like the last year. What do you think? What do you think of this list? Do you feel differently about any of these series conclusions? I would love to know. And then what is the best series conclusion you've read to a fantasy series? Leave those comments down below. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.